Welcome everybody. We're so glad to have you all with us today for our second AIMS Colloquium of the fall series. We're glad that you're joining us today, and we know that this will be a wonderful hour together of learning and conversation. Today in our session, we are joined by our guest speaker, Dr. Carol Tang. Carol is the executive director of the Children's Creativity Museum in San Francisco and is a board member of the Association of Children's Museums. Previously, she led the out-of-school time grant-making strategy at Bechtel Foundation and was director of the National Coalition for Science After School. She directed exhibition and museum programming for the 2008 reopening of California Academy of Sciences. She has a PhD in geological sciences from USC and was also Chancellor's postdoctoral fellow at Berkeley's Department of Integrative Biology, and has also been an assistant professor of paleontology at Arizona State University and served as co-investigator in NASA's Astrobiology Institute. So in short, she hasn't done very much. Just kidding. Tang was also, Dr. Carol Tang was also a recipient of the California STEM Learning Network's Leading Women in STEM Award and has been a board member for the National After School Association. And Dr. Tang's message today and her talk today is around the notion of gender equity in STEM and making resources and research-based practices. We're thrilled to have this important, crucial, critical message at this point in time from Dr. Tang. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Carol, and give you a very warm welcome from all of us here at AIMS and all of our guests joining us today.
Thank you so much. I am really honored to be part of. I've been getting to know the AIMS group from the Making Spaces program that is part of Maker Ed, and I'm just really lucky to have such great colleagues here in California as well as around the country. But there's something special about I think the AIMS team and me and our team that is just really resonated. So thank you so much. Before we get started, I did want to just welcome everyone to put in chat who you are and where you're coming from in terms of geography, but also if you could say a little bit about maybe the grades that you're working with, that would be really great. None of us feel sad about you keeping your cameras off and so on, so don't worry about that, no pressure. Today, what I'm hoping to do is give you a little bit of insight into some specific girl-friendly programming and why we think that's important. And then at the end of this is really focusing on a lot of specific resources and websites and things like that. So what I've done is I have uploaded some QR codes for you. So hopefully you might be able to use that here to download things, but then you'll also have access to this actual slide deck, and it has embedded links and things like that. So don't worry too much about losing pieces. Of course, it's so easy these days to just grab screenshots as well. So we welcome you to do that. So thanks everyone for introducing yourselves in chat. I'm going to go ahead and share screen now. And I will go ahead and present as well. I hope that's coming through. So today I'm going to be talking about girls in making and talk a little bit about the definition of girls and so on. And again, with lots of information and resources for you to look up. So I have a QR code that is the link to the actual slide deck. So you're welcome to grab that. And I'll have the link again at the end in case you're still fumbling with your QR codes, which all of us do these days. So my organization, then, I am at the Children's Creativity Museum, which is in San Francisco, and our mission is to nurture creativity and collaboration in all children and families. So we've been around for 25 years or so, and we used to be called ZM. So those of you who knew us back then, we did change our names and sort of expanded our age group. But one of the things that we've really talked about is this idea that you know, what we used to call STEM, and we used to sort of make very different, like STEM used to be different when, you know, I was going to school and when many of you were going to school. And these days, you know, technology is everywhere, math is everywhere. And this idea of how do we, you know, why do we make these definitions? Why do we make these distinctions when in fact, you know, there's art and science and everything we do. And of course, the maker movement has really brought to fore some of those possibilities and strengths. And so that's what I really want to sort of chat about today, is how we might take the next step forward in STEM and maker and think about who has been engaged in the last 20 years, but who do we still need to engage and how do we do so? So despite the fact that there are things like Hidden Figures and Me Too, there's just been so much more attention paid to gender equity and racial equity and just representation in so many different levels. And yet the real data show us that girls and women haven't made as much progress in STEM careers as we might have thought. We've been doing girls in STEM, women in technology for 25 years. And yes, girls now take AP calculus and AP science classes just as much as boys do. In fact, and it's hard to take one data point, but in one of the more recent AP tests, they found that girls outscored boys, and for example, in some of the calculus ones. So there used to be more discrepancy in terms of access. Fewer girls were taking science classes, and yet that's not true anymore. But when you look at down the pipeline in STEM careers, it turns out that in many fields, women have actually lost footing in some of the fields. So there might be more girls that are taking more math and science. There may be girls who are outscoring boys in math and science. And there may be more boys and girls going into STEM, but the thing is that the percentage of girls going into many STEM and engineering fields is actually lagged behind. And we've actually lost progress in the last few years rather than achieved more progress. So that's why many of us, in education, but also in research, have recognized that it's not just the content, it's not just access, it's something more hidden with what are some of the challenges that we face in bringing girls and underrepresented children into the STEM fields. And that's more about confidence. And do you want to do this work? Even if you tested really well in calculus, maybe you still don't want to be a scientist because there are other things that interest you, or there are actually barriers to your moving ahead. So that's why I think there's been a more understanding of how do we reach younger kids. So it's not just about high school and college. How do we reach, many of you are in middle school and in elementary school, how do we reach beyond that? Or even if you are in college and high school, how do you think about other things besides just the content itself? How do you think about belonging, confidence, and representation, and so on? So those are the kinds of things that I think we've now realized are really important to this conversation, that we can't just talk about access alone. And so these are the kinds of things that still, are pointed to as things that are holding not just girls behind, but people who may not look like any of these pictures. So on the left, I just did a search on my preferred DuckDuckGo, draw a scientist, and you see that yes, there is actually female representation here, but most of them are still, fairly monolithic. And it doesn't represent the diversity that we know is in the field. And these kinds of things, unfortunately, do make an impact on people. And it's not just the draw scientist. I got the tech uniform, which came out of a Business Insider article. And this is the tech bro. And of course, I'm in San Francisco, right next to Moscone Center. So, this isn't a joke. This is really what many people look like. But when it's the only thing you think that people look like, if you don't look like that, if you don't have people around you who look like that, you don't feel comfortable. And so many of the things I'll talk about today is not really just about girls, but obviously gender fluid, non-binary kids, but also anybody else who doesn't look like one of these pictures. So people of color, people who come from different socioeconomic backgrounds, people who have interest in something besides riding around with a beard and with a messenger bag, right? So it's all these kinds of things. So hopefully what I'm talking about today, you can think about girls as a proxy for all the different kinds of representation and the challenges that kids face. So my own personal story is that, yes, I have a PhD in geology, but all through high school and even through college, even when I actually went to graduate school in geology, I actually thought I was going to be a science journalist. And the reason is because if you're a talkative Chinese girl, you people think you're going to be Connie Chung. You are going to be a news anchor. And that's actually what I thought I was going to do. I was editor of my high school paper and so on, even though I like science. And so I'm fighting against this other Asian American stereotype as well of being good at math, being good at science. And so I just didn't know what to do, right? And I was convinced I was going to be a journalist until I actually ended up majoring in science and realized I really like science. And in geology, a field that I hadn't seen anybody who was Asian American or many women in that field, and ended up going into something really different. But along the way, I uncovered how stereotypes and, again, implicit bias, even in my own life, among my own family, of everyone who was well-meaning and wanted me to succeed, but being put into a pigeonhole doesn't allow you to think of yourself in a broad way of what you want to do, what you're interested in. You actually discount what you're good at because you can't imagine that that's going to help you in the future. So even from my own personal experience, I know that these things are important. So when we turn to the maker community, I think that one of the things that we've realized is that make, as many of us know, is an opportunity to reach people with STEM who may have thought that it's not STEM, people who are creating things and building, who are really good at construction, they don't know that that's STEM unless we tell them. And so the maker movement has really drawn a lot of us as educators, as STEM folks in, because it's a chance to reach STEM and increase STEM interest in kids who may not have identified themselves as scientists. And yet the make movement itself has had trouble. This is a paper from 2013, that when they did a census of Make magazine, which is a very influential in our field, but before 2013, only 15% of covers were of women, and there were 0% of people on the cover who were of color. And in self-identified maker communities, there have been surveys where 80% of makers, self-identified makers, are men. And so this was one of the things that really changed when there was more attention being paid to. And this is a Make magazine where the cover was an Asian American woman, not Asian American, sorry, a Chinese woman. And that really sort of broke some of these new thinking of what that means. But even in 2018, there was a study by Drexel, and I'll have a link to that study, but is reported on by EdSurge and others. And the title is really disturbing, right? That maker culture actually has a deeply unsettling gender problem. And so this is so I'll reference that study in just a second, because that actually has really good things that you can do about it. But one of the things that they looked at was just that everything from curriculum, from the way things look, to the kinds of programs, to the way that things are advertised, to the hours of a makerspace, all those things, there are elements of it that actually exclude people, especially girls and women. And so when they dug into it, again, they didn't say it was deliberate. It was just, there was a lot of it that was just unintentional or unexamined practices that have a chilling impact on the final equity issues within those maker spaces. So again, I'll share that study in a minute. So that's kind of the context, but what I wanted to show here today is a few places that we can look that have some shining lights that we might be able to look at, things that are doing things differently, including a program that we did at my own museum. And then again, share with you some research, some resources and papers that you can look at to sort of dive deeper into what things that we can all do to make maker and STEM more inclusive. So a couple ideas of places that I've looked at and places that you might be able to take some inspiration from. Castilleja is a private girls' school on the peninsula here in the Bay Area. Very nice school. You could take a look and Google it and see how nice it is and so on. But one of the spaces that I had gone there was their Idea Lab, which is a maker space. And so because it is a girls' school, it was designed for girls. They actually do co-ed programs there, at least in the past before, but it was designed for girls and by a teacher who teaches girls. And so that's where I went personally to see, what are there really things that are different when you design for girls, and what could those be? Are there really practices that are different? I just wanted to be assured that there were differences instead of me just thinking that there were. And I'll give you one example, is that the teacher who used to be there, who's no longer there, but when she created, there's a few things, she just took us around, she gave us a tour, and she didn't think they were special, but when she said it, it clicked. And one example is that she has things labeled and clear boxes, or hanging in this example here, where on a pegboard. And the reason why she thought it was really important is she says that, again, whether this is nature or nurture, but girls in our society are taught to be polite. And so, if she's talking to a student, the young woman would just stand there waiting for her to finish, when all she needed was a pair of scissors, or all she needed was some tape. And everybody then was stuck. The young woman didn't know where to get for help. She couldn't proceed. And the teacher is here helping somebody else, and yet somebody is hovering over her. She can't focus on the teacher, on the kid that she's working with. And so she realized, well, if I just labeled everything and everything was clear, then they would be empowered to go get their own stuff. They wouldn't have to ask me. And she said that she found that it was different from co-ed programs, is that, again, for better, for worse, boys feel more comfortable. Some boys feel more comfortable being able to interrupt. And so and in fact, there are times where she wanted, the student to interrupt, because it was such an easy way to fix things. And yet, how do we empower girls to be able to do that? So that's just one example of where I was like, well, this is so obvious, because it doesn't just help girls, it helps shy kids, it helps kids who have maybe some language difficulty, and it's good for kids to feel empowered, and you label something, isn't that obvious? And so those are the kinds of things that, that just were really telling. And so lots of organizations already do this, label things and put things into clear. And yet, if you recognize that, oh, this is a way to empower and to bring in kids who may not feel comfortable in a makerspace, it gives you more confidence that you're doing inclusive things. So I think it's just a wonderful example of saying, well, yeah, you do it, but this is the great outcome that you have when you do it. So either do it more, or be proud that you do it, and be intentional about it. So again, we're not talking about ideas that are earth-shattering, or takes a lot of money, but there are practices that can be incorporated within here. Another example here is Girls Garage, which is in Berkeley. And again, I encourage you to Google them and look them up. So they are a space that is where they're allowing girls to think about design and social justice. They design furniture, for example, for different clients, nonprofit clients, but it's, helping girls feel confident with using tools and doing math and so on. And so some of the things learning here is, again, being explicit about things are open shelved, but there's really, these statements about fearing less, building more, is, giving people that identity and really name what they're doing, so they feel confident that that's what they're doing. So again, really good tips there as well that I went and observed and learned. And here are a couple other examples. On the bottom left is a place called Hacker Moms. It's in Oakland, and this is a space that was designed for and by women and mothers, Hacker Moms, and it was their space, and they would have classes, and they would bring in their families. They had childcare. It was just really an innovative. This is what it's like when they designed the program for themselves. And on the upper right is actually one of my former graduate students in geology. She studied mammoths, and now she's running the space in Texas, which is a maker space, a sewing place. It's called the Sparkly Elephant, because she studied mammoths with me on tusks and isotopes. And now she's doing this, but she was a teacher for a long time. She was a middle school and elementary school teacher, and now she's created this space where it's about sewing and quilting, but it's about community, it's about kids' classes, it's about boys learning how to quilt along with girls. But this is what it looks like, and this is what she feels like is an inviting place to do the kinds of things she thinks that girls should be doing. So there's all these different ways of approaching this, whereas thinking about who's using it, who's designing it, what are the conversations you're having about it. So when we were thinking about looking at our makerspace at the Children's Creativity Museum, I do talk really fast, so I hope you guys don't mind. I haven't even had that much coffee today, but I recognize I talk really quickly. And good thing it's on tape and archived, so you can check it out on the AIM Center later. But one of the things that we did at our museum then was we decided that we weren't going to try to guess what girls wanted, and we were actually going to ask the girls. And I'll just give you an example why I just threw up my arms and just said, we've got to ask girls, because if you look at, there's just lots and lots of conversations. For example, I'll just pick a trivial one is, should the space be pink or not? Right. And so, on the one hand, we have, that pink is what lots of girls want, and they want to see it telegraphed that this is a place that's friendly for girls, and using pink would do that. On the other hand, we have forced girls to think that pink is about girls, and there's a lot of girls who don't like pink, and who are we to tell them that this is empowering color or this is something that they should like? I mean, then there's so many things that go with pink. So anyway, so I was just like, oh my gosh, I can't even figure out, like, is it good, is it empowering, is it disempowering? Let's look at it from another perspective, is let's let girls tell us what they think. So what we did was we actually got funding from the Correct Foundation to have a 2-week summer camp where we invited girls between 8 and 11 years old, and we asked them to design maker spaces. So in this 2-week camp, they went out and they did site visits, just like an architecture firm would do or a design firm would do. If we hired them as our design firm, that's what they would do. So they went and visited they even went to, gardens, they went to different spaces, they went to a museum, they went to different places where this idea of what is a maker and what are, girls and boys making, but it was about children. It was about sort of making things, growing things. And so they got to go and they would be like a site visit. They would take notes, what they liked, what they didn't like, notice things. They would interview the people who were there. And then they would come back and they would design things. And then they actually had to build models. And then this is the presentation where they presented to their families. But along the way, in order to do that, we also had a lot of activities where they shared about what their own visions were, what their strengths were, who they were, because we really wanted to tell them that we valued them for who they were, that their unique perspectives mattered. They didn't have to be a generic girl. They didn't have to be a generic viewpoint of what other girls wanted. We wanted them as their unique selves to come in to this project. In many ways, that's how we hire architects, right? A celebrity architects, right? It is about a celebrity coming in and telling you their vision, and it's not a generic vision, it's their vision. And so we wanted to sort of incorporate that idea that they were just as powerful, their voices mattered. And so again, we sort of had a 2-week team building visitor, and then they had role models. They had hands-on activities to figure out what different kinds of making was. Then they broke up into design teams, and they actually built and shared designs and had the capstone with the family event. And here are just some of the things that we found out. So these are, the facilitator wrote these out of what they did. I should also say the facilitator was Dr. Shalini Agrawal, who is a professor at the California College of the Arts. And she's an architect by training, but has been working on sort of inclusive and equitable design. And so she has 2 daughters as well. And so she was really interested in this topic. And so we had hired her to do the facilitation, but she also designed the curriculum in terms of all these, how the progression would go. How do we help them become designers? So these are the kinds of things that we ask them, is why should girls, design a maker space? And so the upper left-hand corner in this slide, girls in STEAM have designed a maker space for other girls because we have ideas, we know about our community, we have different perspectives, and we are empowered to design it. And what is a makerspace? A makerspace for girls has to be welcoming, creative, and inspiring. And in this space, we play, do arts and crafts, build with different materials, cook, plant, read, and build together. So one of the things that we realized is that, we have learning pedagogies, STEM or STEAM, or, we have goals, and they don't want to be, they want to use the term arts and crafts. On the other hand, we have funders, we have curriculum, we have Common Core, and NGSS standards that we're supposed to be. And so taking a step back, and that's one of the great things about working out of school time, is we don't have to worry quite so much about standards and so on. But I think taking a breath and saying, you know what, we know that these arts and crafts have math and, and design and STEM and geometry and so on, but let's not force it on the girls. That's not what they want to talk about. And so there's, there are moments where I, as an educator, just have to like bite my tongue, right? Because, is letting them speak to us about what that means. And so that was really important, me not, freaking out about the arts and crafts, when we know that there's so much more learning that goes with it. They don't need to necessarily know that until you explain it to them later, right? To empower them. But here are the things on the right is what they really wanted to distill. So they had lots of different adjectives as well, but these are the ones they voted on as being really important. And again, I just think for all of us, as we're looking at our learning spaces, whether it's in our classroom or a maker space, this idea that being nice was something that they really wanted. These girls, nice was not a vague, generic vanilla adjective. To them, nice was meaningful, and that's what they really wanted. That's what encapsulated a lot of these kinds of things. It's also really interesting, the organized. Another piece that they actually really came up with, and I'll show you the models in just a second, is that they wanted little surprises. They wanted things that you would explore and find out on your own after you've been there a while. That, again, this idea of being sort of empowered, that it's not an adult telling you, or it's not even another kid telling you, it's you discovered it on your own. And they invented these little secret nooks and notes that you would find in your makerspace. And again, this moment of sort of welcoming, but you're leveling up almost, right? You get to go to the space, but then as you find more secrets, you're empowering yourself, you're learning skills. We would call it mastery, right? And they wouldn't, but it's all those kinds of things combined. So anyway, so very interesting things about what they valued and the words that they used to describe, maybe words that we would use differently, but it was really important to hear from them. So here's a couple of the examples that they did. And again, I'm more of a science person. Many of you are more math people, but as you know, for the next generation science standards, there's a whole appendix J or something, that's about how to translate and reach girls and also students of color, people who are underrepresented or don't feel that they identify in STEM. And one of the things, all the things that they have in that appendix of next generation science standards was shown in their models. So we had 3 teams who presented and made these models, and I'll just give you a couple key things. One of the things from what we know from the research is that when you help girls figure out what's a real world application, they're much more interested. So the example that I would give here is that in one of the designs, it was going to be a makerspace for pets. And you would have a 3D printer and you would design pet toys and you would print them out on the 3D printer and the vinyl cutter, all those digital making things that we think of in a fab lab. You would make them, but then you would try it out on the pets. But there's also a place where people would come and they would adopt the pets. So again, very real world. There's definitely a making component to it. There's an animal component to it, which we know girls are drawn to the biological sciences. And so it's like all these different elements that we can read about in a report. But when the girls present their project, I'm like, exactly, that is exactly why the science, tells us, it's so validating to see that in a case study for girls. The other one example is that, they wanted a place where you could grow your own, plants, it's a good foodie thing, farm to table type of thing. And you can see the model that the young woman is building has chairs and things like that. And so you would have a place you could it would be a pottery studio, and you would make your own cups and plates and things like that. And then you would actually serve the food on it as well. So there's just all these pieces about sort of real life problems that they see, or ways to help society with pet adoptions and so on. And that there was a making was part of that and an integral part of it. But there's still a goal in that was not just about making itself, which again is what the science tells us, that girls are more interested in applications and applied design challenges rather than abstract ones. And that's true, as you all know, with word problems and all sorts of things in math and science. So those are just a couple examples of that. So some of the key takeaways then, and this is from a study, and the next slide, I'll have the QR code for this. We did do an external study. An evaluator came in and did this and talked about how, the way that Dr. Agrawal led the program really changed what traditional design thinking was. So it was a lot more really idea about co-creation and bringing in your personal selves to be able to sort of influence what you think about in your design. Thinking about inclusion and safety is really key. The welcoming, being nice was really important. And then really fostering sort of independent learning, problem solving, critical thinking, where they support each other, for example. And 8 to 11 years old is a span of ages where we wanted it to be that the older girls were helping the younger girls, but that there's a lot of developmental differences between those ages, and we deliberately wanted to do that so we could sort of see how that scaffold would go. So here's the link, but then also the QR code if you want to the actual study. And again, you have this in the Google Drive if you wanted to download the entire deck. But the actual report, the external evaluation report is there if you want to take a look at it. But sort of honoring diversity, looking at the attributes and so on, and then thinking about compromise. So what happens when the girls didn't agree and so on. Those are all those kinds of things that how do they work out their co-creating something, which is something that grown-ups need to figure out too. Actually, it's not a problem unique to 8-year-olds. So with that, I can take a pause, and then I was going to share with you some resources for creating equitable STEM and maker spaces. And I was just going to sort of run through some of these because you'll have links, but sort of introduce to you what are some tools that might be there for you to take to look at your own programming. But is there any questions or anything? Go ahead and put them in chat if you'd like. Let's see. Otherwise, should I just go on then? I can do that. Go back to, okay.
Carol, maybe we could just say that we'll have some time too at the end if there are questions that we'll have some Q&A. So if you have questions percolating and you didn't get a chance to put them in yet, we'll have some time at the end. So hold on to them.
Great. So then this one is a study that not very many people know about, and I think it's fantastic. And so I have the link here and the QR code because it's a really long link. So this is actually from California Community Colleges, and Elizabeth Dayton did this literature review and then several recommendations, and it's very extensive. So if you're writing a grant, if you want to look at the research, I go back to this over and over again in terms of, there's just a lot of great information here about, what have other people done in this area. So this is about for women because it's for community colleges, but it's a really great resource. I can't promote it enough, and they keep moving it on the website, but that link, I believe, I just checked it this morning, but they're making changes quickly to that website. So I've had to download it many times, but it is active right now. But it is, how to draw women into the maker movement. And the recommendations that she makes based on this literature review is, one is broadening the definition of making, is that, probably the people who are already interested in making are already in making. Everybody who it doesn't feel like they belong in the maker community has already has already decided this wasn't for them. So rebranding of it or using different language, broadening the definition of making. And this is where one piece I think we are, yes, so this is what Chris is saying, sort of looking at growing anti-expertise bias within the broader culture. Oh, it's sort of, yeah. And so thinking about how identifying women, for example, in STEM careers, very similar to this is this idea that, what are we calling as an expert or non-expert, or what is making, all those kinds of things I think need to be relooked at. The other one that she has is really offering open-ended and versatile instruction, which again is part of Maker, but she finds that there are some curriculum, for example, that are less about open-ended and less individualized. And so thinking about, how do we relook at our curriculum, emphasizing the human benefits. And that's what we were saying, girls especially and women seem to be interested in, what is this? Is this not just an abstract project, but how does this actually benefit humans? Do I really want to spend my time and my skills doing this? Does it really help other people? And that seems to be really important in engaging girls. And then of course, building inclusive maker communities. And that's doing all those other three things and then sort of continuing that trend. So let me give you a couple other examples of how to do that. So this is about a study that's about the physical environment, let's say, because this is about exhibits. So the Exploratorium did this National Science Foundation project, which is about how to design exhibits for girls' engagement. So not all of it necessarily is relevant for a classroom or a makerspace, but I think a lot of those are, use of drawings and images of people, which I'll talk about, images of girls and women, for example. But this other piece I think was really interesting. You can look at the whole study, which is looking at familiar objects, homey, personal, homemade, or delicate, playful, whimsical, humorous. And to me, these are that's what maker spaces are about. And where science centers can look a little bit more like maker spaces is those kinds of things. And again, the interactions as well, open-ended, visitors can watch others. That's what maker space is about, sort of apprenticing, being able to see what other people are doing. Accommodating family groups, for example, and having multiple stations. So again, if you're looking at the physical aspects of your classroom or learning spaces, I think that this is a really good study to look at, even though it's designed for museum exhibits. For the study that I had shown from EdSource that said, it's a bad situation in disturbing in making culture. This was a study that EdSource was referring to. And so I really recommend taking a look at the study as well. This is where one of the centers at Drexel looked at a number of different maker spaces around the country. And their number one thing is really focusing on the culture of your space, which is the foundation for sustained student learning. And that's the key. So that, in the picture number one, there is culture is what everything else rests on. And that they recommend that their maker spaces are not looking enough at culture. And that's what I was trying to show you when girls design their space. They don't really care so much about what the projects are. They care more about it being nice and friendly and fun and creative. So the other things, for example, avoiding exclusionary language and imagery. That's why I'm going to show you some more resources about how to avoid some of these things. Beware implicit gender bias in language and instruction. So again, I would just highly recommend that you take a look at this study. And there are some of these infographics that is a summary of it. But again, if you want to know the research, or if you're looking at doing a research project or looking for grants, this might be a place again where you can draw on to help you think about what you're creating and how to improve it. Next then is another, this one's from California. STEM Next is located in San Diego, and the STEM Next Opportunity Fund has been doing really great things about families, which I'll show you in a minute. But they specifically have some practices about engaging girls. And one of the leads of this is Linda Kakelis, who was the founder of Tech Bridge Girls in Oakland, one of the first really, really high quality programming about girls in engineering. And so this work is really based in research as well as practice. But, some things don't seem to be like things you should have to talk about, but we do, talk about what a girl does and not what she wears. You're so pretty, that's really nice. And I do that with boys too, but talking, trying to reconfigure that, because it ties into sort of reinforces what a girl thinks other people feel about them, that their looks are really important versus what they do. And don't let girls think it's okay to avoid a challenge or step away from an activity that is messy. And this really goes to the third one, which is empowering families, especially mothers. That, when parents were asked if they wanted their girls to be scientists or engineers, twice as many families said they wanted their girls to be actresses or singers or celebrities than scientists. And so, it really does matter if we need to engage families and so on. And part of it, especially for immigrant families and families of girls of color, my family, it was always, that's too messy. Don't get near the edge. Girls don't do those kinds of things. It's and so that's why they were shocked pretty much when I became a paleontologist too, is that, it really does matter in terms of all those things. And so this is one of the things that STEM Next has done then, is that there's a number of things, and I believe they now have more tips on there, but I would definitely recommend going to the STEM Next page. They have lots of promising practices, short, practical, not overly expensive, but different ways to look at different aspects of the kinds of programming we do. Another one that has just been updated recently, which is SciGirls. So SciGirls is, a show on PBS, but they also have a number of publications that help you look at your programming or modifying existing programs to be more gender neutral. So thinking about sort of doing a census on what you do well and what you could improve. And so they have some specific strategies that they've pointed out, which is connecting STEM to girls' lives, supporting girls using STEM practices. So, calling out when they're doing STEM, empowering girls to embrace struggles. So that is one of the things that, is really come to light now, is that, girls don't take risks as much as boys do. And that results in a lot of different behaviors. So for example, they're less likely to call out answers because they want to think it through. Again, I'm generalizing, but this is based on research and lots of research in the classroom that girls, why they behave differently than boys do. Again, I'm not making a judgment call whether it's good or bad. It's just, and the percentages are there though. So how do we help girls realize that STEM is hard? It's also, you have to struggle and you're going to have it wrong sometimes, but that's okay. That's part of growth. So growth mindset, I think, is where the aspect here about empowering girls to embrace struggles, encouraging girls to challenge STEM stereotypes within their families, within themselves, emphasizing that STEM is collaborative and community oriented, because that's what's they don't want to go into STEM because they think of it as the lone genius in their lab who's making, weapons. And so therefore that's not for them. So thinking about what that means. And then the last one about sort of thinking about interactivity, and that interacting with diversity, and that they can see themselves in those roles. And we don't know what it is that they're going to see themselves. Is it just gender? Is it just sexual orientation? Is it just economic? Is it just race? It's all of those things put together. Girls want to see that they could be successful as a scientist. So again, I encourage you to look at the SciGirls. There's a whole guide here, but they also have various elements too. So then, related to the idea about sort of looking at diverse role models and so on, I just wanted to end with a couple different resources for you where you can look for somebody in your community to come and speak to you, speak to your kids, or also just to pull up some ideas and videos that are already done and resources. So Fatbenz is a directory by the National Girls Collaborative Project, where there are profiles and they're tagged and they're searchable with a database of all different kinds of ways, by what they study, where they live, what their background is, and so on, that you can then hopefully find somebody and actually contact someone who's willing to come and give a Zoom talk or answer some questions for an after school club. Another one that's new then is the If Then collection. And so this just launched a few months ago. And so there's been quite a bit of effort on this, but what it is it's a series of images. It's a collection where there's also ambassadors. So there's role models where there's you can contact them, but also there's videos about what their life story is, what they do, why it's important. But then also, perhaps more importantly, is a series of collections that I find that they're images that you can use and videos that you can embed, and they're not copyrighted, so that you can use them. So they're authentic and relatable images of women in STEM available, so you can just download them and use them. So if you need a poster, you're doing a PowerPoint, you're able to bring in sort of diverse stories and images that will then again help with girls thinking about the fact that they could be scientists, or that scientist stereotype is not accurate all the time. But there's also a whole book about this gender representation. They have a sort of a guidebook and strategy for you. And then I think this is the last one, is then CareerGirls.org is another one where it's not just STEM, but they have a large collection or library of STEM women who talk about their careers, but lots of different careers here. But this is another, again, free resource and database that you can use. You can also just be inspired by all the great things that people are doing out there too, but this is something that you could let your students look at. And again, this is good for girls and boys. Boys need to realize they are part of the solution about breaking stereotypes and looking at gender roles and being inclusive. The more boys realize that everybody can be a scientist, that they can be scientists as well. So this is good for everybody. So the summary is that's the QR code again for this whole deck, because there are a lot of embedded links and so on in there. I think the summary that I wanted to end with is just to say that, there's a lot of things that we can do. We don't have to just give up just because people have been doing things for 20 years and we haven't made a lot of progress. That's not the end of the story. The story is that we now need to do the kinds of things that we as good educators have always known was important. How do you engage kids of all sorts in deeper ways, so that it's not just about doing a worksheet. It's not just about the math skills, the science skills, and the facts that they need to know, but it's also about how they should feel proud of knowing that, where they can find things that they're interested in, that they're good at, things they want to struggle with but get better at. How do they make things? How do they design things? All those kinds of things that help kids grow to be healthy adults. That is part of this. We are talking about identity, about confidence, as well as skills, as well as practice, as well as mastery. It's all those things put together. And it's whole child, and that's what us as educators have wanted to do for a long time. Math teachers, I think, have been talking about, how do we make sure that people understand that math is part of their everyday lives? It's not compartmentalized in 1 hour of instruction a day. It's everywhere in their lives. So I think that this is a good way to go. And that hopefully, we'll be able to sort of make more progress. And again, there are so many of these studies already out there that you could be referencing, but it still comes down to this idea of how do we make people welcome? How do we understand, what drives them, what's going to motivate them, and that it's individual for each different person. So that I just wanted to say, is really what changes will you make? What changes will you make in your home, in your school, in your programming, that just tweaks things a little bit more and welcomes one more girl, welcomes one more gender fluid young person, welcomes a boy who was shy and didn't think STEM was for them. What are the changes that you can make tomorrow that will help you connect to one more young person? So with that, I'd love to take questions and see what you all think.
Thank you so much, Carol. If there are questions, I would encourage you to do the hand raise in Zoom feature. So your name will pop up to the top. If you prefer, and that's if you want to ask your question over the Zoom meeting for everyone. If you would also like to just post a question in the chat, we can do that. Carol, there was a question earlier from Scott, who is curious about the definition of girls or women with the trans or non-binary communities who also want to be included in STEM and STEAM. Do you have any comments about that?
Yes. So we've been struggling with this for quite some time. And in fact, we did assemble a group of people who had a conversation about that. And I've also asked the Maker Ed Making Spaces group about it. So we are part of the Children's Creativity Museum is part of the California Girls in STEM network. And one of the things that we're doing is we're focusing on making this year. And so we had this conversation about it. And I think we were more worried about using girls than so there were people who are transgender and who are gender fluid who told us that we're overanalyzing it, that many people who you know are rethinking their gender identity and sexual orientation and all those other things that young people are doing, that, you know, there is that when we use girls, it's a signal to them that they understand that we're talking about looking at you know, the non-stereotypical boy in science. And that it does represent something that they did not feel excluded by us saying that we were trying to be girl friendly. They felt that if it was girl friendly, it would be friendly to them. Let's put it that way. So I'm not sure that that represents everyone. You know, we just heard from a few voices, but they were pretty strong in saying that we were overthinking it, that, you know, saying that we were girl friendly did not exclude boys either, that, you know, but it did show our intent to analyze and to deconstruct traditional gender roles within STEM and making.
Right. It seems to me too that in your presentation, you shared kind of that idea of broadening notions of what it is to do making activity and broadening that. And so in the design process, you're designing for inclusivity rather than taking sort of resources or activities that were perhaps designed for exclusivity and kind of just trying to use those with underrepresented groups. So actually be engaging individuals who have not had a voice or a place in the field in the design of those experiences. And so it seems like many of the things that you shared for girls could be sort of used in a variety of different settings with a variety of different learners. Yeah.
So I think what we've landed on is that we would say, you know, we're talking about girl-friendly practices and so on, but then in the tagline, we would also say, you know, that this is also you know, clearly inclusive of non-binary, gender fluid, transgender, and so on. That it's just re-looking at, and so I think for the adult side of it is just this idea about gender equity, I think also captures that idea. But we did struggle with it quite a bit, and to the point where we felt like it was actually holding us back. Like we were too cautious on actually just getting started and being open about accepting criticism, you know, and being, you know, welcoming. If people would like us to change the name, we're open to it. We just need help doing so to signal our intent.
Dr. Tang, there's another question from Elin who says, it seems like young boys and girls start out having the same interest and confidence in math and science, and then around 8 to 11 years old, girls lose interest or confidence or feel like it's not for them. Is this why it's important to have special opportunities for girls only, or have some groups separated by gender at this age?
So I think that it's a really good question. So I think that, you know, it's clear that my middle school, it's just the drop is precipitous. I mean, it is a cliff about girls' interest in STEM and their confidence and their identity. The interesting thing, though, again, of course, is that many girls are still taking those classes and excelling in them, and they still don't think they're good at it. And that's what breaks my heart, to be honest. You know, like if getting A's and outscoring, you know, everybody in your class still doesn't give you confidence or interest, or, you know, the vision that you could be a mathematician, it's really sad to me, I think, you know. So yeah, so 7th grade seems to be the 6th to 7th grade seems to be a pivotal, and it's in one of the studies actually that anyway, email me and I can send those to you, where it's clear that this is just a big change. So I think that the idea about is there a role for girl only? So the National Girls Collaborative Project and the California Girls Network, we've been struggling with this for quite some time. And so clearly a lot of the practices and things that we share out are for everybody who are teaching co-ed as well. But I think that we're saying that there is a place, and maybe it's not every organization is comfortable or qualified or able to offer girl only things. But it does seem that there is this supportive role where they don't have to worry about boys interrupting them or boys getting more attention or, you know, all those kinds of things. And it's not just about girls becoming boy crazy, which if you read some of the original literature, there's a lot of things about, well, maybe, you know, girls are just all of a sudden more socially aware of boys, and that's why they don't do well in middle school. And we're saying, you know, that maybe it's not just hormones, maybe there are other reasons why girls lose interest as well. So so I do think that, you know, we're saying that all these things are good for co-ed as well, but I do think that we should not give up on the fact that there are some places, and I think it's clear that boys benefit from places that are only boys as well too, or situations where, you know, they can be themselves too. So I think that it's hard to say those things because we always want to have things equal, and you know, segregation doesn't feel right. But I think that there is a way to think about what are the conditions and settings that help. You know, there are going to be kids who do better in co-ed, but, you know, this idea about thinking about what are the settings and conditions that make it more successful in different places. So I think it's definitely complicated, but I think for girls, it's clear that there are many girls who benefit from a girl only or girl first setting.
Great. Are there any other questions anybody would like to ask out or post into the chat?
Well, Chris is saying that
Chris has an interesting question.
Could it really be that that students that girls leave science in middle school because middle school science completely separates itself from everything you just talked about? It's like absolutely disconnected from their real world, and it has no relevance, and it's truly boring. Maybe that's part of the problem, and not so much the way it's approached. You can't approach feces without it smelling like feces.
I think that you know, on the one, there is a drop off in boys as well, for sure. I think that there is clearly a drop off in interest in STEM, you know, in middle school. It's just that it's disproportionately large in girls, and therefore there's something, at least impact wise, that's different. That is gender specific. But clearly there are, you know, ways to make, you know, and could even just be, it may not be the curriculum or how it's taught. It might just be, you know, there are some things that, you know, can't be done in a middle school period, right? That maybe some of the kind of more interesting science does need to be open-ended. So it does, again, it may not be the teacher or the practices, it's the structure of it that may not allow for some of those things. So I think clearly that's one of the issues, is that it's not good for anybody, which is true. I think the other thing that is not looked at so much these days is that the girls who are good in science are also good in other things. And when they get to college, they decide those other things are more worth majoring in. So it's not necessarily, especially the high functioning, you know, high achievement, let's put not high achievement, you know, that there's a lot of girls who are saying, you know what, I could go into science. I don't feel excluded, but I just don't think that's going to help society as much, or I'm not going to be as happy, or there's other barriers. And it's not necessarily cognitive. It's not necessarily achievement. It's not grades. It's nothing like that. It's just, you know, it's not a life I want to be in. It's not even that they don't feel like they could do it. They just don't want to. And so that's where I think it's also this middle school thing, is where you're taking all these other great subjects and you've now learned about, English as a subject, and reading literature, and, and all these other things that you learn in middle school that you didn't necessarily get to, have a whole class in elementary school. And girls are finding that they have broader interests than just one thing. So I don't think it's all negative, but I do think that the way, we structure a lot of middle school in general is hard on kids. Good. And so someone's talked about TV programming and females. So, it turns out that NCIS or CSI, I believe, it is what has been cited as an influential factor in girls going into science for a while. You saw all these really accomplished, attractive, and I don't just mean looks, I just mean, like with great personalities, and they were running these forensics labs, and so there are these interesting things. X-Files is another one, is that if you look at it retrospective of a lot of scientists, women scientists in the field, and you ask them what was their influence, X-Files comes up. Because again, a very competent, person who has a good personality, and who's a scientist, and who's always telling Mulder, to think scientifically, that inspired a lot of scientists. So this is interesting, looking at sort of these retrospective of asking scientists, women scientists, what was your influence? And it is these ideas about Mythbusters and CSI and X-Files.
Dr. Tang, we want to thank you so much for bringing this important, critical presentation to us today. Thank you, all of you, for joining us and engaging. I think there's so many connections, whether we are in out of school learning experiences, or whether we are in school learning experiences, to engage girls in both the design of those experiences and spaces, as well as in the learning outcomes that we're all seeking. So thank you so much. I just posted a link to Dr. Tang's presentation in the chat. Hopefully you've gotten some of the QR codes that have been sprinkled throughout. Thank you so much for doing that. So helpful. And if you want any further resources, we will post just a collection of links on our website that you can follow up with additional resources. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Tang. We've appreciated it tremendously.
Thank you so much. It was really fun. Thanks so much.
Okay, everyone, I hope you have a wonderful evening. We'll see you next time in November. We have another colleague, Dora Medrano Ramos, who will be with us. Dora will be talking about a little bit more of a mathematics edge, but also around the idea of equity in the design and making and learning in STEM. So join us in November. And until then, we hope you all are safe. Thank you and take care.
Thank you. Nice meeting you all.